I used to think holidays stitched families back together, even when the seams were frayed. This year, the table looked beautiful, candles steady as held breath. China older than my hands, steam curling up. Like little prayers, he leaned in with sweetness too shiny, offering the gravy waiting watching. Mothers know the weight of a look. We learn it rocking colicky nights, reading fevers, hearing truth inside a polite voice. So I did a small thing that felt like nothing at all. I slid one plate for another, as if tucking a blanket straighter. The room kept laughing. Forks clicked. Somewhere a laugh rang, a shade too bright. And then the quiet under everything split. Pain, pale lips, sirens. I sat very still, listening to the house remember me. Age teaches you to carry storms like teacups, without spilling, without shaking. But all I could taste was the question that would not cool. What kind of love hovers and waits for me? I stayed after the sirens, the house suddenly too big for its own breathing. Plates cooled in my hands. I stacked them the way I've always done. Quiet work edges aligned, no clatter, like tidying could make sense behave. The gravy boat sat there, heavy and dark, pretending to be harmless. I found a clean jar, poured the last of it in. Watched the ribboned browns settle and gloss. Lid on, tight. The pop of the seal sounded louder than it should have. I slid the jar deep behind the cranberry jelly, the place where no one looks. A small act, but mothers live on small acts. We keep records other people call fussing. I wiped the table twice, then a third time, until the wood felt like a page turned smooth. In the dark kitchen, the refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked, as if tapping its foot at me. I thought about smiles, how sweetness can wear sharp edges, and how long I've let them pass as kindness. My coffee had gone cold. My hands had not. In the quiet, something steadied. Tomorrow I decided the evidence would have my name on it too. The house kept breathing cinnamon and turkey fat. A sweetness that made my teeth ache. I took the old notebook from the drawer, the red one with a broken spine, and opened it to a blank page. It hadn't seen my handwriting since the year we buried winter with a cheap bouquet. The phone lit. She's stable. I'll keep you updated. No, how are you? No, I'm here. Just a status report, like I was a neighbor on the edge of his street. I set the phone face down and let the night spool backward. I wrote what my body remembered before my mind argued the too eager smile, the fingers hovering near my plate, the laugh a shade too bright, the simple slide of china I've practiced all my life when serving children. I wrote the time the sirens painted the snow red, the way the gravy looked under the light. Slick, dark, almost pretty. How the jar seal popped when I pressed it shut. Then I made columns what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. Mothers learn to keep ledgers no one respects, until a bill comes due. The clock ticked like a metronome. I drew a line under my notes and wrote 3 words I could live with in the morning call. Document. Remember. I took the jar out like it was a small sleeping animal and set it under the sink light. When the gravy slid onto the plate, it spread in a slow, glossy pool. I stirred small circles, then tighter ones, listening to the spoon whisper against porcelain. That's when I saw them tiny flecks that didn't belong stubborn as grit. Not pepper's polite specks, not time's greenish threads. These were dull and pinched and wrong. I eased one onto a toothpick and held it up to the light. It caught nothing, no scent I could trust, no memory to match. My mouth knew better than my pride. I didn't taste it. I just watched it cling to wood like a secret that preferred the dark. I rinsed the spoon, wiped the plate, slid the rest back into the jar. Lid on, tight. I wrote today's date on a piece of tape, pressed it hard across the glass, and tucked the jar behind the cranberry, where silence keeps things cold. Then I opened my notebook and added a new line to the ledger only mothers keep. Tomorrow I make a record of this. The call came at noon sun, sitting flat on the sink like a coin. Grandma. Her voice was small the way children sound when truth is bigger than they are. I saw Dad with the gravy. He used a dropper. The room tilted just a breath. Tell me slowly, I said. She did, How the bottle was glass, how his hand jumped when she walked in, how he smiled too quickly and told her to help set the table, how the door to the kitchen felt like it closed on her face. "Thank you," I said, and meant it like a blessing. "You did the brave thing. I don't know if I should have—" "You should have," I told her, gentle but firm. "And now we'll be careful. Don't tell anyone yet. Not your mother, not your friends, not even in a whisper." I wrote the time beside her words in my notebook. I promised her I wasn't afraid. I promised her I would keep her safe. "Grandma, yes, honey. Are you okay? I am now." I said, "Now I am." I opened the file cabinet and pulled the envelope he'd slid across my table months ago, white harmless smudged at the corner where my thumb had pressed. "Just hospital paperwork, Mom." I remember the way he said it, easy as passing salt. I remember my pen, the tired part of me that wanted peace more than clarity. I signed because mothers do, because the child you rocked at 3 a.m. can still sound like lullaby when he asks for ink. At the counter, I eased the papers flat. The font was small, the language careful. Then the words stood up and rang the bell I had been pretending not to hear. Durable power of attorney. Not a permission to speak if I couldn't, a permission to take if I couldn't resist. Finances, property, where I live. Heat moved through me. Not fury, sobriety, a kind of waking that makes the room brighter and lonelier at the same time. I capped my pen, squared the pages, and wrote one sentence on a sticky note. I could not ignore. "This signature has an answer coming." I read every line this time, lips moving like I could taste the truth if I shaped it carefully enough. There it was in plain, polished ink. If I were deemed incapacitated, he could decide what I spend, what I sell, where I sleep. Not a gentle hospital courtesy, not a clipboard form, so a nurse could call him in an emergency. Authority, durable, hungry. Waiting for the moment, a mind is fogged, and a signature can't argue. I felt no panic. Panic is noisy. This was quiet, like opening the back door in January and letting night air roll over your wrists. A clean, hard cold slid across something I had always kept warm for him. I saw the table again, the gravy again, the way lights painted snow in ambulance red. If I had gone in confused, drowsy, agreeing to anything just to be warm, the locks on my life might have clicked from the inside. I stacked the pages square. Trust didn't break with a shout. It froze. And in that stillness, I heard something thawing in me. A promise to answer what I had signed. I pulled the family ledger from its shelf, the blue one with corners rubbed soft, by years of being opened for just a little help. The pages smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil. I ran a finger down column after column. Hot water heater roof patch, temporary garage fix that never fixed back taxes twice. Urgent dental school trip I never once resented, and all the small, some days that somehow became always. Each line wore a polite reason. Each reason wore my yes. I totaled nothing. I didn't need the math. The truth wasn't in the sum. It was in the habit. I heard myself whisper almost kindly as if speaking to the woman I had been, "No amount buys decency." The room didn't argue. I closed the book and felt its weight as something clean, not shame, but record. I laid it beside the envelope and the taped jar in the fridge, now humming like a witness. Then I reached for the phone, not to scold, not to beg, to draw a line in ink that wouldn't wash off. "Mark," I said when the office answered, "I need to see you. Today." I called his office, and the young voice at the desk put me through. "Mark Adler," he said, steady as ever. "I need to change my power of attorney. Today." A small pause, a chair creaked. "Do you feel incapacitated, ma'am?" I almost smiled. "I drove myself to the grocery this morning, fixed a leaky faucet last week." Read the business section without moving my lips, and I'm about to ruin a man in Florida with a very patient chess move. The silence on his end softened. "All right," he said. "Let's set a time." "Not next week," I answered. "Not when you can fit me in." "Tomorrow, 11 a.m. Bring what you signed. We'll read it together." After we hung up, I wrote the appointment in my notebook, block letters, no wiggle room. I set the envelope on top of the ledger, placed my car keys beside both, like laying out clothes for the morning of a test. The house hummed around me. Ordinary and on my side. I wasn't hurrying, I was done delaying. The hallway smelled like old coffee, and floor wax the kind of ordinary that steadies your feet. He met me at the door and waved me in no fuss, just space at the end of a long desk. I slid the envelope across. He flattened each page with the side of his hand, reading the way. Good men listen, eyes moving, not rushing, not rescuing. When he spoke, he kept his voice plain. This isn't hospital permission, it's authority durable. It covers finances, property, where you live, should anyone label you unable. The words didn't sting, they clarified like windows after rain. He looked up. Do you want to revoke this? I would. He turned the papers, drew the clean lines that undo careless ones, and set the pen where my hand could reach without searching. I read every sentence, let each period land. Then I signed, no tremor, no hurry, my name shaped like a held decision. He notarized, clipped, and slid the old power aside, harmless at last. Good, I said, surprised by my own calm. Let's keep going. He drafted the revocation while talking me through the rest, like a map you don't rush at night. This, he said, tapping one page, is your living, will your voice. If illness tries to steal it, another tap. This is a no contest clause. If anyone fights what you've chosen, they forfeit their share. His hand rested on the next packet. And this, the strong box, an irrevocable trust. The words felt heavy in a good way, not a door to swing, but a vault to shut. Irrevocable means it isn't for changing moods, he added. You place your home, your accounts, your wishes inside. Management follows the rules you set. No one, no son, no spouse opens it with a story or a signature. I thought of keys I'd handed out in the name of love. I thought of how easily a smile can pick a lock. Then we don't just undo what I signed, I said. We build a fence they can't climb. He nodded already, marking the places where my name would stand like posts in the ground. Let's set the posts now. The bank smelled like paper and polite coffee. I asked for a manager because that's what you do when you've decided to stop being easy. Mr. Lee wore a tie with small ducks, the kind men choose when they want to seem safe. He clicked through my account, eyes moving left to right, then pausing in the kind of silence that tells the truth first. There's an auto transfer, he said, $1,500 monthly, to an external account, Jeremy and Melissa. Note says maintenance support. Stop it. Cancel it now. He blinked once, then nodded. Keys tapped. The sound felt like a lock deciding to be a door again. For your records, he offered, would you like a printout? All of it, I said. 12 months, every page. While the printer rattled, he tried a careful voice. These were authorized under a power of attorney. Revoked, I said, yesterday. You'll receive the documents today. He handed me the warm stack. I slipped it into my bag, a new kind of ledger, against my hip. Outside, the air was thin and honest. I stood for a moment on the curb, letting the sun find my face, and felt something unlatch inside me, quiet final done. The phone lit the dark like a stubborn moth. Jeremy, again. I let it ring until the house swallowed the sound. A voicemail arrived, flat words about concern about what's best. I set the phone face down and poured water over a tea bag I would forget to drink. Caitlin called a little later, breath-catching. They're saying you're confused, forgetful, that maybe you should consider a home. Sweetheart, I said, keeping my voice warm enough to hold her. When people can't move you, they try to rename you. She was quiet, then I don't believe them. I told her thank you, and to keep her ears open, not her heart exposed. No arguing, no proving, just noticing. When we hung up, the kitchen felt like a chapel hummed by the fridge, haloed by the streetlight. I stood in that small, faithful glow and thought of the oldest lesson I know. They will call it love, while they empty your pockets and your voice. If they mean to tuck me into silence, I'll answer with volume. They can't fold ink dates, signatures, and a steadiness that does not ask permission. I remember the checks written in kitchen light, The balances dipped and balanced again. Student loans when the market went bad. Back taxes twice because the notice was a mistake. The garage repair that lived forever on paper and never once in lumber. Each ask arrived with a reason, polished smooth by worry, and I did what mothers do, I made worry smaller. Of course, dear. It became a hinge in my mouth, swinging open without thought. I told myself generosity was ballast, that it kept a family steady through rough water. But generosity is not the same as surrender, and the ledger in my head finally read in ink instead of excuses. I stood at the counter where so many envelopes had been opened and signed and sent. My hands knew the ritual too well, the reach for the pen, the soothing stroke of yes. I laid my palms flat as if to quiet a skittering animal. And a sentence arrived that did not ask permission, did not apologize, did not tremble. Not anymore. I laid everything on his desk the way you set a table for truth bank statements. Clipped in tidy months, a typed list of joint expenses that looked polite, until you read it twice a printed screenshot of the urgent email about temporary access to my investments. He didn't rush. He read the way good men drive at night, slow enough to break. When he finally looked up, there wasn't pity in his eyes, only clarity. This is exploitation. I didn't need the word, though it fit like a label on a jar. I needed weatherproofing. Then we build for the long haul, I said. He nodded and began to outline spine knot drama certified revocation notices to the bank broker insurer, written instructions no phone, changes in person only, fraud alerts, copies for me and for him, dates on every page, a witness where a witness helps. We talked about what's enforceable when feelings turn into paperwork. I'm not here to punish, I told him, surprising myself with the steadiness. I'm here to last. He capped his pen. Then we'll write this to outlive the weather. He drew a box on his legal pad, then another inside it. We place your assets here, he said, tapping the inner square. An irrevocable trust, not a promise you can be talked out of, a structure. You name a trustee you trust. They follow the rules you write, not the feelings in a room. If illness comes, or pressure comes, or time does what time does, your wishes don't move. I pictured keys I've handed over in the name of love. How quickly a smile can pick a lock. Irrevocable, I repeated, feeling the weight of the word sit down in my chest like a steady guest. He slid a blank where a name should go. Choose someone whose first instinct is care, not convenience, he said. I let the silence measure me. I thought of small hands washing dishes without being asked. Of a girl who called when truth scared her, of eyes that have looked at me and seen me. The pen felt warm between my fingers. Caitlin, I said. He nodded once like a gavel you can barely hear. Then we'll write it, so no one can unwrite you. Your granddaughter, he asked, eyebrows lifting. She's 17, I know, I said. She's also the only one who told me the truth when it would have been easier to keep quiet. I let that sit between us, the kind of sentence that doesn't need decoration. He studied my face the way doctors read a pulse. All right, he said slower now. We can structure this with a professional trustee in place immediately, neutral, bonded, accountable. Your granddaughter will be the primary beneficiary and named successor, co-trustee upon reaching majority. We'll define her powers, the guardrails, the timing. You keep the compass, we lock the map. I thought of the call at noon, the tremor in her voice, the courage it takes to notice and still love. Write it that way, I said. She learns beside someone whose only job is duty. He nodded and began to draft language that felt like rails laid in daylight distributions. By rule, health and education considered no loans against the trust. No third-party advisors without approval. At the signature line, he tapped once gentle. This honors her, he said, and it protects you. We built the pages like a shelter studs first, then walls no nails skipped. He read every line aloud, careful and plain. I followed with my finger, then my eyes, then my breath, letting each clause settle where fear used to live. Where the language widened, he explained. Where it narrowed, I asked. We left no hinge loose. He showed me where to initial in the margins those small anchors that keep storms from prying. Date here, print there. The notary stamp pressed down with a soft, final thud like a door choosing its frame. I remembered the old me signing with a tired flourish to make a moment end. Not today. When the pen found my hand, it felt like wait not worry. I shaped my name slowly, letting the steadiness show no wobble, no apology. One page, then another, until the stack was no longer a threat, but a structure with my voice in its beams. I wasn't just signing papers. I was countersigning my life, this time with both eyes open. I cleared the dining table and built a spine for my memory. The old POA went first creased where I once folded it away. From thought then the bank statements month by obedient month. I slid in the typed joint expenses, neat bullets that read like kindness until you add them up. I tucked the printed urgent email behind it, and a small museum of sticky notes mom sign. Quick, just permits, temporary access. Every yellow square was a breadcrumb back to the place I'd stopped asking questions. I chose a red binder you can't mistake on a shelf, fed plastic sleeves until the pages turned like glass. Tabs POA revoked bank expenses investment notes. On the cover label block letters, I could see without my glasses what they took. This wasn't for a courtroom, though it could walk into one. It was for the kitchen at 2 a.m. For the moment, a soft story starts to blur hard facts. A book to open when doubt gets noisy and the past tries to make a liar of me. I went back to the bank with my red binder in my bag, the way some women carry perfume. Mr. Lee greeted me with that seminar smile, but I didn't sit down until I knew what I wanted to say. I need some locks, I told him. Real ones. He folded his hands. I laid it out slowly like cards. No changes to my accounts by phone, none online, no verbal confirmations. If something needs to move, I'll be here in person, with identification and a pen. He nodded, started typing. We can put in-person only notes on file. And one more thing I added. Any attempt to use this, I slid a copy of the old power of attorney toward him, is to be declined and flagged. It's revoked. Completely. He read the stamp Mark had placed across the top, then looked back at me. I'll add the restriction and print confirmation. The printer warmed and spit out a page with my name and a new hardness under it. Outside, I slipped the paper into a sleeve at the front of what they took. It felt for once like something they couldn't take back. The trust account office was quieter than the main floor, thicker carpet, fewer apologies in the air. I told Mr. Lee what I wanted, and he typed without looking surprised. A custodial trust for your granddaughter. Initial funding. $150,000, I said. The number sat in the room like a stone, dropped into deep water. It was the same amount Jeremy once called a starter investment, the one that vanished into promises and smoke. This time it would land somewhere real. He pulled up the form. Any advisory permissions for her parents? None. I answered, Jeremy doesn't touch it. Not as manager, not as consultant, not as curious family. This is hers, only hers. He nodded, entering notes that felt like locks clicking shut. When he slid the signature page toward me, I signed with a steadiness I didn't need to practice. Money has always felt like something I owed, something that traveled out of my hands with a wince of guilt. But not today. Watching that balance move into Caitlin's name felt like placing a warm coat on the shoulders of a child. Stepping into winter necessary protective right. I kept the receipt folded at once and slipped it into what they took. Though this one finally deserved a different tab, what I gave to the right person. I laid out the good plate, the one with the tiny chip only she and I notice, and filled it with the things she loves. Cheddar crackers, apple slices dusted with cinnamon. The folder waited beside it, thick with signatures, and a future she hadn't asked for, but had earned. When she came in, she dropped her backpack by the door, like always. Cheeks pink from the cold. Something smells good, she said, trying to sound casual, like the last week hadn't cracked her world a little. I slid the folder toward her. "This is for your future," I told her, "and your freedom." Her fingers trembled on the cover. She read the first line, saw her name, saw the word, trust, and her eyes filled faster than she could blink them clear. Why, she whispered as if a louder word might break the room. "Because you never took," I said. "You only saw, and you told me anyway." She pressed her forehead into my shoulder, and for once giving didn't feel like losing anything at all. Jeremy's name lit up the screen before the kettle even finished its low rumble. The ringtone felt sharper than usual, like it carried teeth. I set the phone on the counter, pressed speaker, and kept stirring the water in the pot, as if the world hadn't shifted under us. "What is going on?" he snapped. "The bank says I'm blocked from the accounts. Did you do something?" "Yes," I said, calm as steam rising. "I revoked the power of attorney." Silence, then a sharp breath, the kind people take when they realize a door they assumed was theirs has been locked from the inside. "You should have talked to me first," he said. "This is extreme. You're not thinking straight." I placed 2 mugs on the counter, steady and deliberate. "I'm thinking clearer than I have in years." He started to argue something about responsibility, about how families should work together. I let him speak until the words folded in on themselves. "Jeremy," I said finally, soft but immovable, "listen carefully." The kettle clicked off behind me, a quiet punctuation. Now if anything happens to me, the police know exactly where to look first. The line went dead so fast it was almost gentle. The house exhaled, and so did I. The station smelled like burnt coffee and old floor cleaner, the kind of place where bad days come to sit down. The officer who called my name looked barely older than Caitlin uniform, a little too crisp eyes, a little too careful. "What can I help you with today, ma'am?" "I'm not here to press charges," I said, taking a seat. "Not yet. I'm here to make sure if something happens to me, you won't be starting from zero." I laid the folder on the table, Mark's typed summary on top. The bank statements underneath a copy of the revoked power of attorney with its bold, merciful stamp. I spoke slowly, like I was reading a recipe I wanted him to remember. Thanksgiving, the gravy, the dropper, the hospital paperwork, the transfers I never approved in my heart, even if my hand once did. He wrote while I talked, pen scratching. Then he turned the form toward me so I could see the words he'd chosen: potential financial coercion and attempted harm. It was the first time this story existed anywhere outside my bones. The house felt different after the station, quieter, but not empty. I hung up my coat, put the folder back in its place, and reached for a number I hadn't dialed in years. Lenny Hayes answered on the 3rd ring, his voice roughened but familiar. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Haven't heard this line in a while." "I'm still on the right side of the grass," I told him. "But I think someone's been gardening around my roots." He chuckled once, then let the sound fade. "Tell me." So I did. The gravy, the switch, the jar in the fridge with its taped date, the paper I signed without reading, the transfers, the bank, the police report. I didn't soften any of it, didn't apologize for seeing what I saw. When I finished, there was a long breath on his end. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. "Not your names, but this pattern. It's a slow bleed dressed up as concern." I didn't need comfort. I'd outgrown being soothed. What I needed was exactly what I heard in his voice. A man who wasn't afraid to turn on all the lights and stand there with me, looking straight at whatever moved in the dark. He showed up the next morning with a thermos of black coffee and a manila folder that looked heavier than its paper. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place I'd once frosted birthday cakes, and he spread the pages out like a weather report, pulled what I could from public records, he said. Financial activity, a few business filings, his LinkedIn fluff. There were consulting gigs that started and stopped too quickly, properties bought and sold like hot stones, notes about restructuring and leveraging assets that always seemed to circle back to needing more. Lenny tapped one page with a knuckle. This pattern means one of two things. He's getting ready to run. Or he's getting ready to fight. The words didn't surprise me. They arranged what I already knew. I looked at the columns of dates and amounts and realized I was not a mother in his story anymore. I was a line item, a contingency plan. He'd folded me into his exit strategy. Lenny slid a printed email across the table, the paper warm from his jacket pocket. Melissa's name sat at the top like a smudge I couldn't wipe away. I read slowly, letting every word land where it intended to wound paranoid. Memory lapses, concerning behaviors. Is there a way to initiate a cognitive evaluation without her consent? A request polite on the surface, engineered to sidestep me entirely. When I reached the end, I didn't gasp or clutch my chest. I just set the page down, smoothing its edges with 2 fingers. So they want the court now, I said. It wasn't shock. It was the click of a puzzle piece I'd been circling for weeks. The gravy, the paperwork, the whispers about confusion, it all pointed here. Not a misunderstanding, a strategy. Lenny watched me closely, as if waiting for crumble or fury. But what settled inside me was colder, quieter, more precise. They weren't trying to help me, they were trying to sideline me. And now I finally had the proof that my instincts, those small alarms I'd silenced out of love, had been telling the truth all along. He rested his hand on the email eyes still on me. "You want me to dig more?" he asked. "I can pull phone records, talk to a few folks, see what else shakes loose." I shook my head. "No," I said. "I don't need more shadows. I want to answer that email. In person." His mouth twitched almost a smile. "You sure I've been talked about in enough rooms?" I replied. "It's time I walk into one they think I won't." In my mind, I saw their house, the careful siding, the trimmed shrubs, the welcome mat that never quite meant what it said. I pictured myself on that porch, not as a guest, not as a burden, but as the subject of the conversation they'd tried to have without me. "I'm not asking for permission to visit my own son," I added. "I'm just deciding when." Lenny nodded slowly. "Then go when you're ready." "I'm ready," I said. "I just need my coat." I parked at the curb, the house trimmed in white. Like something meant for a catalog, pretty, in a way that tells you the mess is all behind the walls. My tires crunched the gravel softly, the kind of sound that makes a person look out their window before they decide how to greet you. Melissa opened the door, with her arms held tight around herself, as if she were bracing for a draft. Her smile didn't even attempt to rise. "Oh, hi. We weren't expecting I'd like to talk," I said. "Just us." She stepped aside because manners are easier than honesty. The living room smelled faintly of eucalyptus, and new fabric, every cushion arranged like a promise no one intended to keep. I sat where the light from the window touched the armchair so she could see my face clearly. Without a word, I reached into my bag and placed the printed email on the coffee table between us. The paper made a small final sound when it landed. Melissa stared at it first, then at me, her shoulders stiffening like someone realizing the door they meant to close had never latched. "I know about the email," I said, my voice as even as if we were discussing curtains. "And I know what's been said when you think I'm not in the room." Confused, forgetful, paranoid, color drained from her face in a slow wave. I was just worried," she stammered. "We've noticed things and we thought maybe—" "No," I cut in gently. "You didn't think with me. You thought around me. There's a difference." Her eyes flicked toward the hallway, like a dog waiting for its owner. "Maybe we should wait for—" "He knows I'm here," I said. "If he wanted to sit in this conversation, he'd be on that couch." She swallowed hands nodding in her lap. Denial came out thin. "You're misunderstanding." "I'm reading your own words," I replied, tapping the paper. "So let me make mine just as clear." I leaned forward, not unkind, just done. "From now on, I won't be the old woman you work around," I said. "I'm the wall you don't get past." She glanced at the kitchen, grasping for something ordinary. "Let me make you some tea," she offered, voice too bright as if a steaming cup could fog over everything written on the page between us. "No thank you," I said, standing. "I know my way to the door." She rose too, hands smoothing invisible wrinkles from her sweater. For a heartbeat, I saw the woman she might have been if fear and greed hadn't taken the wheel, tired, worried, just trying to hold a life together. But intentions don't undo actions, and concern doesn't excuse erasing someone while they're still breathing. At the doorway, she waited for a familiar script. Some balm, some I love you. Tossed over my shoulder like a bandage. Take care, I said instead. It landed between us, light but solid, a boundary, disguised as kindness. Outside, the cold air wrapped around me, sharp and clean. For the first time in a long time, the wind felt big, but I didn't feel small inside it. A few days later, the mail brought an envelope the color of toothpaste, too soft for what it carried. No return address, just my name in a careful hand. Inside, a single typed page waited stiff with self-importance. It accused me of defamation and intimidation, warned that further behavior might force them to pursue protective measures. The sentences were long and smooth, the way people write, when they're more afraid of courts than of conscience. No signature at the bottom, just a blank where courage should have been. But I knew the rhythm, the phrasing, the way concern was wielded like a weapon. It sounded exactly like the woman who'd asked if I wanted tea while her email tried to erase me. I didn't tear it up. I didn't scrawl a reply in the margins. I folded the letter in half, then in half again, neat, precise, and set it on the kitchen table the way you'd place a specimen on a slide. Something to study, not something to swallow. First, I picked up the phone and called someone who had never sat at my table at all, a reporter. A woman who'd written a series on elder abuse that made me put down my coffee and really read. I told her I wasn't ready for headlines, only for preparation. I want the story in a drawer, I said, finished, in case I ever need to open it. She understood. Women usually do. Then I sat at my desk with their letter in front of me and wrote one of my own. No emotion, no history lesson, just facts in black ink. I have retained legal counsel. All prior authorizations have been revoked and documented. Any further attempts to contact or pressure me will be treated as harassment and referred to law enforcement. 1 page. No tremble in the pen this time. I printed it, signed it, and sent it certified mail, so there'd be a little green receipt somewhere, saying yes, they were told. Then I waited to see what silence would do. The car rolled to a stop across from my house, black newer than anything in my driveway windows, tinted to keep its intentions warm and hidden. It didn't idle loud, it just waited. 10 full minutes of stillness. Not a door opening, not a figure stepping out. Just presence, like someone holding their breath with the engine running. I stood behind the curtain, 2 fingers parting the fabric just enough. I didn't panic, and I didn't reach for the phone. Fear wants you to move too fast. Experience teaches you to stay still and let the picture sharpen. The car didn't belong to any neighbor. It wasn't lost. It was watching or waiting for me to be someone easier. But I've stopped being easy. When it finally pulled away, slow and stiff like a creature retreating, I let the curtain fall back into place. I didn't think, what are they planning? I thought they're afraid of what I've already done. Caitlin showed up near dusk, breathless from hurrying cheeks, pale under the porch light. She didn't even take off her backpack before the words tumbled out. They told me I'm not allowed to see you anymore. She said, they said you're unstable. The word hung between us, sour and thin. And yet you're here, I said softly. Of course I'm here. Her voice cracked on the of course like it had been held too tightly all afternoon. Grandma, I don't care what they say. They don't see what I see. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, the way I did when she was small enough to fit on my lap. Honey, I don't want you caught in the middle of this. It's not your fight to carry. She shook her head stubborn in the quiet way only truth can be. I'm not in the middle, she said. I'm beside you. And for the first time that day, something in me, unclenched, gentle, relieved, like a door opening inward instead of closing shut. She hesitated, then pulled out her phone like it weighed more than glass and metal. I have to show you something, she whispered. Her thumb hovered, then tapped an audio file labeled only with a date. The room filled with voices that shouldn't have needed recording. Melissa first sharp and low. It should have been her. I told you not to mix the plates. A rustle, then Jeremy muttering. She was just supposed to be tired, not poisoned, just enough to raise concern. The doctor said. I pressed pause. The kitchen went so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator click on in the next room. Caitlin wouldn't look at me. Her eyes were on her hands, knuckles white around the phone. "Hey," I said gently, "look at me." She did, and I saw it all there. Fear, guilt, the kind of knowing that comes too early. "You did the right thing," I told her. "You're brave." Her lip trembled. I thought I was ruining everything. "No," I said. "You just stopped them from ruining me." That night, after Caitlin went home with her shoulders squared a little higher, I sat at the table with my red binder open and the house breathing its small, familiar sounds. The recording sat in my email, now backed up twice, printed once. Proof had finally stopped being just a feeling in my ribs. I picked up the phone and dialed Lenny. He answered on the second ring. "I have the tape," I said. No preamble, no apology. He didn't ask if I was sure, didn't question what he already knew I wouldn't say lightly. "Then it's time," he replied, simple as turning on a light. We spoke about next steps, copies stored, who hears it first, how to hand it to people who can't pretend they didn't. His voice was calm, all gravel and experience laying out a path like flagstones. When I hung up, the fear that had been pacing inside my chest finally sat down. In its place came something quieter, heavier, far more useful. Preparation. The morning was so still, I could hear the mail slot rattle 3 houses down. When my own doorbell rang, the sound felt almost polite. I opened it to find 2 people on the porch, one in a uniform, one with a badge on a lanyard, both holding clipboards like shields. "Ma'am," the woman began, "we're from Adult Protective Services with law enforcement present. We have a warrant to conduct an evaluation. A family member has requested a review of your status as a vulnerable adult." There it was again, that word they wanted to drape over me like a heavy coat. Vulnerable. On what grounds, I asked. They glanced at each other, eyes sliding down to the paperwork. Phrases like confusion, paranoia, financial risk floated up in careful ink. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself on the porch like a child caught out of bounds. "I will cooperate," I said, "but I want my lawyer present." The uniformed officer nodded. "We can wait." I closed the door gently as if quiet could keep my heartbeat steady and reached for the phone. First Mark, then Lenny. No pacing, no tears, no frantic explanations. Just the facts and the time the officers would be back. When the calls were done, I set the kettle on and brought my red binder to the kitchen table along with the new stack from Mark. I laid everything out in rows: the irrevocable trust, the revocation of the old power of attorney, the bank statements with their tidy betrayals, the transcript of the recording where my own family wished I'd been the one on the floor. Sunlight fell across the pages, catching the raised seal on one document, the blacked-out account numbers on another. I took a pen not to sign anything, but to underline what mattered to me, and now to anyone who cared to look. For years, other people have narrated my concerns, my confusion, my needs. This time, when they walked back through my door, the story would already have an author. They came back just after lunch, shoes squeaking faintly on the entry rug. This time, Mark was already at my table, jacket off, reading glasses, on a quiet anchor in a room full of paper. The APSO worker opened her folder and began in that careful voice professionals use when they think they're being kind. Concerns have been raised about memory lapses, increasing paranoia, possible inability to manage finances independently. Each phrase was followed by a citation that wasn't a test result or a doctor's note. It was a sentence per daughter-in-law's report. Mark lifted his head. "We'll need transparency," he said. "You don't get to assume incapacity based on hearsay. My client is cooperating, not surrendering her rights." They shifted a little uncomfortable eyes, going from him to me to the neat rows of documents laid out like witnesses. "You already have my statements," I said, folding my hands. "My records, my chronology. If you want more than that, get a court order." The county building felt like any other place, where lives are sorted, beige walls, humming lights, a waiting room full of people pretending not to listen to each other's troubles. When they called my name, I followed the hall to a small office with one window and a woman who looked like she'd long since run out of patience for nonsense. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, offering her hand. "I'm Rachel McKee." We sat. She had my file open already, a thin stack that had somehow made so much noise. "We've reviewed the request for a capacity evaluation," she began. "Based on the information provided, there's no evidentiary foundation. The case is closed. You are not under review for competency." I let the words sink in, though they only confirmed what my bones already knew. I nodded once. "Good," I said, "but that's not why I'm here." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "All right," she answered. "Then tell me why you are." I reached into my bag for the thicker file, the one that carried their words, not just mine. I set the heavier folder on her desk and opened it so she could see I hadn't come with feelings alone. The audio file on a small drive, the printed transcript, the affidavit Caitlin had signed in a hand that shook but did not waver. Mark's summary dates marching in order, no drama, just what happened when, and who said what. Rachel slipped on her glasses and read in silence. When she reached the line, it should have been her. "I told you not to mix the plates." Something in her face changed, not shock exactly, but a hard focus like a lens tightening. She kept going until she saw Jeremy's whisper about just enough to raise concern. She looked up at me, then not as a case file, not as a complaint, but as a witness. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, voice steady, "we will open an investigation. Not we'll look into it, not we'll see. An investigation, not my suspicion, not my word against theirs, a record with teeth." Rachel took off her glasses and set them on the file, studying me instead of the paperwork. "Do you feel safe?" she asked. It was the kind of question people usually answer too quickly. I let it sit a moment, feeling for the truth instead of the polite reply. "Now I do," I said, "because it's not just my word floating in a kitchen anymore. It's on your desk, in your system. It exists somewhere they can't rewrite," with a worried tone. She gave a small nod, the kind professionals save for when something real has happened. We shook hands, no promises, no guarantees, just the sense that the story had finally left my shoulders and found a place with a case number. On the way out, the glass doors hissed open and winter walked straight into me. The air was sharp and clean, biting at my lungs. I stepped into it slowly, letting the cold wrap around my face like proof. Whatever happens next, I am no longer invisible. A few days later, my name slipped into the paper, not on the front page, not even above the fold. Just a small column with a smaller headline. "A local woman under review for elder care concerns the kind of story people skim between sports scores and coupons." No mention that the review was closed. No mention of no evidence. Just enough ink to plant a doubt. I read it once, twice, feeling the old sting of being misunderstood. Brush against me, and then pass. This time I didn't crumble. I walked to the printer, watched the article slide out warm, and took a pen to the margin. I wrote the date, the section circled the line that said under review. That copy went straight into my red binder slotted behind the investigation notes. Not as a wound, but as a marker on a map. One more pin in the timeline of who moved first and how far they were willing to go. Caitlin showed up just before sunset, shoulders hunched, eyes rimmed red like she'd been holding back everything until she crossed my doorway. She didn't bother with small talk this time. "They're fighting," she said, voice thin. "Mom's saying she'll sue you for, I don't know, something." Dad slammed a door so hard the frame cracked. "They keep saying I don't understand loyalty." She wrapped her arms around herself the way kids do when they're trying not to break. "I feel like I betrayed them, Grandma. Like I chose sides." I set my hands on her shoulders, steadying her the way you steady a bird that doesn't realize it's safe. "You didn't betray them," I said softly. "You refused to help them hurt someone." Her lip trembled. "It doesn't feel like that." "That's because you're brave," I whispered. "And brave people always feel the cost first. They only understand the truth later." She let out a shaky breath, and for the first time all day her weight eased. Not from the burden lifting, but because she realized it was never hers to carry alone. I went to the drawer where I keep the things I don't want to lose and took out the envelope I'd been working on at night long after the news was off. Inside was my handwriting, page after page. Thanksgiving, the switch of the plates, the jar in the fridge, the papers I signed and unsigned the tape on her phone, and the knock on my door. I handed it to her. This is the story I said, from my eyes and my words. You can keep it, burn it, publish it someday if you choose. But whatever you do with the paper, remember this, your history isn't made of silence. She slid a finger under the flap, pulled the pages out, and read the first few lines. Her mouth pressed tight, then broke. Tears ran down without her even blinking them away. She didn't offer it back. She folded the letter once carefully and held it against her chest, like something she intended to carry forward, not return. That night, when the dishes were done and the house had settled into its soft clicking and humming, I reached for the old box of candles I keep above the stove. It's a habit from another life. Light one when something has shifted so much that pretending it hasn't would be a kind of lie. I chose a small white one, nothing fancy, and set it in a chipped saucer on the kitchen table. The match flared, then calmed. The wick caught and held. The flame was modest, no drama to it, just a steady, quiet insistence on being seen. It didn't flicker, even when I walked past. I sat there watching that little column of light and felt the day line up behind me, bead by bead. Police, papers, my granddaughters shaking hands, their anger sent through other people's mouths. Tomorrow might be loud lawyers' phone calls, more stories told about me, instead of to me. But the worst has already happened. They've shown me who they really are. The days that followed were strangely still, an unfamiliar kind of quiet. No cars idling at the curb, no envelopes slipped through the mail slot with carefully sharpened words, no calls from numbers that pretended not to be theirs. Just the house breathing in its gentle, ordinary way. One afternoon, the phone finally rang. Lenny's voice low and certain that investigation's open. You don't need to push anything. Let the system move now. No urgency, no caution, just closure beginning its slow work. When I hung up, I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room listening. The silence was still there, but it was different now. Not the kind that comes from being ignored, sidelined, or treated like fading wallpaper. This silence was permission, a clearing, a space where I didn't have to defend my memories or justify my instincts. For the first time in a long time, I felt allowed not to disappear, not to retreat, but simply to be myself again. Caitlin arrived on a gray afternoon sketchbook pressed to her chest like it held something fragile. She didn't say much, just sat beside me at the table and flipped to a page she'd been protecting with a sheet of tracing paper. A face stared back at me, lined, thoughtful, weather-worn. My face woven into the curling limbs of a tree branches, growing through the hair around the jaw, lifting toward light. I touched the page lightly. Is that me? She nodded a small, sure motion. It's not a prison, she whispered. It's a tree. You're still growing, Grandma. For a moment, the world softened around the edges, all the papers, hearings, accusations. Everything that tried to shrink me down into something fragile fell away. I saw myself the way she saw me, not trapped, not fading, not a burden to be managed, but a root, solid, alive, still reaching. In that drawing, I understood something I hadn't let myself believe until now. I hadn't just survived them. I'd become the ground she could stand on. When Caitlin left, the house felt full of her. For a while, her laughter still hanging in the corners, the echo of "you're still growing" caught in the curtains. When that gentle afterglow faded, I did something I'd been putting off for years. I started to clean. Not the polite kind of cleaning, not dusting around the same old ghosts. I opened closets and cabinets and asked a simple question of every object. Is this still me? If it wasn't, it went. The heavy curtains that kept out more light than they ever gave privacy down. The good china for company no one ever visited long enough to use wrapped and boxed. The knickknacks I bought to make a life look softer than it felt, into a donation pile. I lifted the box of Derek's things, too. Cufflink's old receipts, a tie he hated but wore for me. I didn't throw them away. I just put them in one place, on one shelf, where memory could be chosen instead of tripped over. Every object I let go of felt like peeling off another costume. I'd worn too long the endlessly agreeable mother, the quiet woman in the background. Underneath all that clutter, I was still here. When the house finally felt like mine again, I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper. No forms, no fine print, just a blank space and a pen that knew my hand. I told myself it was only a draft for Mark to polish, but I wrote it as if it could stand on its own. One page. The house in full to Caitlin. A modest gift set aside for the women's shelter downtown, the one where I used to fold donated towels and pour coffee for strangers, learning to live without fear. Everything else, books, dishes, savings I could have hoarded, out of spite hers as well, in whatever order makes her life lighter. I didn't write Jeremy's name. I didn't write Melissa's. Not as punishment, not as a final slap, but as a simple reflection of the truth. They are no longer part of what I am building. When I finished, I looked at the page and felt no triumph, no gloating, only a quiet, solid relief. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity in ink. Morning light is not kind to anyone over 70, but that day it felt almost honest. I stood in the bathroom, hands on the cool edge of the sink, and really looked at myself for the first time in a long while. Not the quick sidelong glance you give a stranger in a shop window, but a steady, searching gaze. The face was the same soft lines around the mouth, a neck that told the truth about gravity hair, thinner than it used to be. But the eyes had changed. There was no fog there, no flustered woman second-guessing every thought because someone younger said she should. I didn't see an old lady slipping. I saw a woman who had walked herself out of a trap, who had read every line, signed her name awake, and put her own story into official hands. I leaned a little closer and said it out loud, just for me. You're not to be pitied. You're to be remembered. Morning came quietly quiet, in the right way, not the kind that presses on your chest. No footsteps on the stairs, no doors opening and closing with the impatience of people who think the house belongs more to them than to you. No waiting to hear whether someone else's mood would shape the day. Just the gentle tick of the wall clock, the soft sputter of the coffee maker finding its rhythm, and my own heartbeat, steady, unhurried, finally answering to no one but me. I sat at the table with my mug warming my hands and understood something I'd spent years too afraid to name. Loneliness isn't the enemy. Being used is. Silence when it's yours is not emptiness. It's space room to breathe, to think, to exist, without being edited or managed. For the first time in a long while, the morning felt like mine. Lenny called just after breakfast, his voice carrying that calm certainty I'd come to rely on. Just an update, he said. The investigation's moving. The DA might reach out in the next few weeks, but you're not required to lift a finger. Your part's done. There was a rustle of papers on his end, then a softer pause. You did it, Grace. I let the words settle. They didn't land like victory, more like a small stone, placed exactly where it belongs. Thank you, Lenny, I said. I didn't ask what would happen to Jeremy or Melissa. I didn't ask what charges might come or whether they were panicking, scrambling, blaming each other. That used to matter to me, how they felt, what they might lose, whether I should shield them from the consequences of their own choices. But not anymore. Their fate is no longer the axis my life spins on. What happens next to them isn't the definition of my future. I hung up the phone, poured myself another cup of coffee, and breathed deep and clean into the space I had finally reclaimed. A day in my life now would look dreadfully dull to anyone waiting for headlines. I wake up because my eyes are ready, not because someone else's schedule yanks me out of bed. I open the back door and water the plants, what's left of them, watching the soil darken, the leaves lift. Like they're relieved too, the paper arrives with its usual bad news and crossword. I read both pen in hand, taking my time with the clues and the truth. Around mid-morning, I sit at the table and answer a chess postcard from the man in Florida, who still doesn't see the trap I've set 3 moves ahead. I pick a record or the little radio something soft and let it murmur in the background while I wash a few dishes that no one else dirtied. No plot, no drama, just small tasks done at a human pace. And that after everything is the prize I didn't know I was fighting for. For the first time, my quiet belongs to me. Caitlin arrived just before noon, the door opening without hesitation, like she still trusted this house to hold her. She had a paper bag with 2 bagels and that soft, relieved smile that only comes after choosing the harder truth. She sat down, unwrapped the bagel, and sighed. "They're not talking to me," she said. "Not really. They go quiet when I walk in the room. Mom keeps saying I'll understand when I'm older. But I don't regret anything." Her voice didn't shake. It had weight now, edges, a steadiness she'd earned the hard way. I reached across the table and touched her hand. Just lightly, the way you touch something precious. "You saved me," I said, without knowing you saved yourself too. She blinked, confused for a moment. I continued, "Truth doesn't just protect the person you tell it to. It protects the person brave enough to speak it." Her shoulders loosened. She took a bite of her bagel. And for a quiet moment, 3 generations worth of hurt eased just a little in the space between us. When we'd finished eating, I went to the sideboard and took out another envelope, not as thick as the first, but heavier in a different way. Inside were copies, the article draft the reporter helped outline the timeline, a clean version of my letter. I slid it across the table. "One more thing for you," I said. "This isn't money. It's permission." She frowned a little curious. "Permission for what?" "For the story," I answered. "If someday you decide it needs to be told to a friend, to a courtroom, to a stranger who thinks they're alone, you have every right to tell it. All of it." She looked down at the envelope like it might glow. I held her gaze. "Whatever happens," I said, slow enough for the words to root. "Remember, our story is not shame. It's warning." Something settled in her face, then a kind of quiet inheritance. She nodded once, serious as any oath, and tucked the envelope into her bag like an invisible heirloom she fully intended to keep. The truth is simpler than the movies ever made it look. There will probably never be a scene where he stands on this porch with flowers, eyes wet, saying I was wrong. Mom, she won't show up behind him trembling with remorse, asking to come in and talk like family. More likely, they will drive past this house and tell themselves a version of the story where they were only trying to help. Holidays will be hosted elsewhere. My name will be used in the past tense long before my heartbeat quits the present. This door, the one I've opened for scraped knees, forgotten keys, surprise visits with laundry, will stay shut to them. Not slammed, not barricaded, just not opened. For a long time, that idea would have broken me. A mother is taught to measure herself by who comes home. Now I see it differently. Letting that door stay closed isn't bitterness. It's the healthiest thing I've ever done. I step out onto the porch with my tea cupped in both hands, letting the steam rise into the sharp winter air. The sky is that clear metallic blue that makes every bare branch look etched, every breath show itself. The boards under my feet creak the way they always have, but they don't sound tired anymore. They sound familiar. There's no part of me scanning the street for headlights that might turn into my driveway. No small knot in my chest wondering if today will be the day someone arrives with apologies or accusations. The road is just a road. The sidewalk is just a sidewalk. My phone is inside on the table, face down, blessedly silent. I don't feel the urge to check it to measure my worth in missed calls or angry messages. I lift the cup, taste the heat, and feel it settle. For the first time in years, I don't feel old. I feel real. When I look back, it's strange how something as simple as a plate of gravy could tilt my whole life into focus. One small switch at a holiday table, and the cracks in my good family showed themselves the papers I signed. Too quickly, the money that flowed one way, the love that always seemed to come with a receipt. I learned to reread what I'd been willing to trust, to see the difference between concern and control. I built a trust with my own hands, tore up the old permissions. Put my story into police reports instead of whispered complaints. I stood upright while they tried to drape me in the word. Confused. I chose Caitlin. I chose myself. I chose clarity over the comfort of silence. Age is not invisibility. Silence is not safety. And this life, what's left of it, is finally mine. If you've ever seen someone controlled because they're getting old, share this. And if, like me, you still have a voice, don't let anyone sign for you again.